we had a client that came to us and said, hey, we'd like to invest in distressed self-storage. And I couldn't find one.
Welcome to the Real Estate Marathon Podcast, your guide in the race to financial freedom through real estate investing and sound financial practices. This podcast is for anyone interested in learning more about real estate investing, personal finances, and a new take on traditional retirement. Now, here are your hosts, Larry Fierro and Mike Moe.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Real Estate Marathon Podcast, your guide on the race to financial freedom through real estate investing and sound financial practices. My name's Mike Moe, one of the hosts of the show. Joined with me today is Mr. Fierro. What's going on, dude?
Oh, Mike, having a great day today. How about yourself, my friend?
Man, I can't complain. Really can't. We're just chatting here with Mr. Scott Krone about self-storage. We're like I said the last time, when the niches are in the riches. All right, wait, no, backwards. The riches are in the niches, my man. And that's what we're diving into today. Is we're talking about self-storage, a niche of real estate where I'm really not familiar with. So it's great to get a little education on that from Mr. Scott Krone today.
Yeah, I love delving into the little known niches of real estate and trying to expand everybody's horizons and help them add to that tool belt, man. Yeah.
And this is a concept that was super infuriating when I started looking at real estate, because it was like, there's 100 different niches and you can go a million different ways, but it's good to get a good idea of the landscape out there so you can really decide what you're attracted to and then dive deep into it, right? So it's not to dabble a little bit here and dabble a little bit there. It's really just to, as you're learning and as you're educating yourself about these different parts of real estate, what one speaks to you, which ones do you really think that you can excel at? And then once you find that, really, really, really diving into it. Cause like the cliche saying is, as I botched it the first time around, the riches are in the niches. If you can become that expert in that niche, you're going to be, rewarded for that expertise. So.
Yeah, you never know who's listening to the podcast today, and they might just hear Scott talking about the self-storage and be like, that's me. That's what I'm about, for sure. So.
Yeah.
Yep. But you want me to jump into the warm-up?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This is something Scott talked about in opportunity zones. And what opportunity zones are, they're an economic development tool that allows people to invest in distressed areas in the United States. Their purpose is to spur economic growth and job creation in low-income communities while providing tax benefits to the investors.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good opportunity if you know the ins and outs of it. It's just like another niche of real estate, right? Just like, low income housing or, government subsidized housing. If you know your way around it and you know your ins and outs of that part of the investing, it could be really good opportunity. So, but opportunity zones is another way that the government is trying to influence investors and incentivize investors to, put money into areas where they know they need it.
Absolutely. And you could take advantage of some good deals if you know how to use the system and get the low income housing, to be a little bit better for the people living there.
Yeah. And if you get the systems to do so, like anybody will tell you, you can go find some really good opportunities in these areas, but you got to have different systems and different people involved in that, because it's very different than running, a C or B or A class property,
It is. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, you want to jump into Scott Krone?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
All right.
Scott Krone, welcome to the Real Estate Marathon Podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm ready for this run. I've heard a lot about it.
Heck yeah, we're excited to have you, man. We're excited to dive into your story and dive into the 4 methods of passive investing. So, but before we do that, can you give a background of kind of who you are and what you're doing?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. So my background, I began in architecture back in 1991, getting my master's in architecture. And I was fortunate enough that my professor, whom I sought out, I was also his TA, and he owned a real estate development company that also did architecture and construction. And so most of the time that I was his TA, I was literally working on his company's work. So in the morning from 7 until noon, I would be working in his office as part of my TA-ship. And then I'd go to class from 1 to 6, from 2 to 6 was his class. Then I'd go home and from 7 until midnight be doing homework for his class. And so I really learned not only the design side of things, but the development. And we were working on multifamily and mixed use and commercial and stuff like that. And so I worked for him for 6 years. And then in 1998, I started Coda, and we began doing design build and development. And we started off with single family and then progressed to multifamily, mixed use, commercial, until the crash came. And that's when a lot of all those products just really dried up in terms from a lending perspective. And I started buying distressed multifamily apartments. And then I also got into self-storage. And since that period of time, because of the differences in what self-storage offers in terms of the economic environments, we've been focusing our portfolio strictly on self-storage now.
It's awesome. I know we're talking about the 4 methods of passive investing, but we are the Real Estate Marathon podcast, so we can't not dive in a little bit to those 2 nuggets around your distressed properties and the self-storage. So what type of distressed properties are you investing in? Is it like, the super vacant multifamily apartments, or what? Can you give us a little bit more idea of what type of properties those were and what your plans were with those properties?
Yeah, we were doing that. That was right after the crash, because keep in mind, in that market, the only thing that banks were lending on was apartments. Yeah. And then the cap rate compression became so great, it was like very difficult to find a deal within it, because that's where, you had all these different segments of real estate, and then they're all turning their attention to multifamily. So the competition became extremely tough within that. And so historically, if we would analyze 10 deals and go after one, now we're examining like 200 deals and trying to get one. It was just a lot more effort to get a nugget. And with the cap compressions, I felt there was just way too much risk. So that was one of the reasons why we began, we had a client that came to us and said, hey, we'd like to invest in distressed self-storage. And I couldn't find one. And, in my background with development is where you really make the money. When you're changing the program of a property and changing the income level, that's where you get the most appreciation, the most value increase, and the most wealth generation is through that process. And so that's where we began doing it. So what we're looking for within our self-storage, when we say distressed, we also call it underutilized. So the last property that we acquired was in Dayton. It was totally empty. It was distressed. It'd been distressed for a while. And they were trying to turn it into apartments, but they couldn't do it because they couldn't meet the parking requirements. And so we were able to come in there and we're converting it into self-storage. So the same thing in our property in Milwaukee, it was being underutilized as a storage component, but we're converting it into self-storage where there's more than ample demand for that. And so that's what we're looking for, is underutilized / distressed commercial properties where we can convert them into self-storage facilities.
That's awesome. And with your background, I just want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into this, especially with where we're at in the current situation with the pandemic and everything going on and the potential massive shifts that this could have. Do you see a lot of these like radical transitions from what buildings are being used today to what they could be used for tomorrow? And where do you see that? So I hear a lot of speculation around office buildings, around a lot of companies seeing that they can work effectively from home, and why do they need this massive overhead of this huge office building, and potentially changing that into self-storage or apartment complexes or affordable housing or things like that. With your background in that, do you see that? And if you do you have a time frame that you kind of foresee that unfolding, and who's best to take advantage of that?
Yeah, so I mean, to answer the first part of your question, we went back and really studied the last 4 recessions. So I've been around long enough that I've seen 4 recessions. So, you might not see the gray hair in the camera, but it means I've been around long enough. But in each of those 4 recessions, going back to 91, which we had massive inflation, then we had the tech bubble, then we had the housing crisis, and now we're in the front end of the recession. I think, it's 2 economic quarters of downward trending defines a recession. And we certainly had the first quarter because of March. But obviously we're trending in that direction. But the point being is that self-storage only dropped a little and then rebounded very hard. It came back, if it dropped 1 percentage point, it then came back by 2 or 3. And every single recession, there's a slight dip and then a buildup. We just opened up one facility in March, right before the governor shut everything down. It was like the official, we did a soft opening and then the official hard opening. And we're 25% occupied. in the heart of the pandemic, and that's because self-storage is deemed essential. So that's one of the benefits of it. And so, will every building go to self-storage? No, because of the fact that there's a couple different factors. There is one, there's zoning, there's the underlying zoning, and would it be allowed by the municipality? And then two, market saturation. So we're specifically looking at areas, which is something I couldn't really do when I was on the multifamily side, of seeing where a true supply and demand intersect and what are the markets for those. So we're able to look more analytically at self-storage than we are other products. And so that's one of the things that's really attractive to us. So where do I see these big boxes going, and whether it be commercial or retail or those sorts of things? A lot of that has to do with the receptivity of the local municipality to accept that the norm is changing. So there's been a lot of historic big boxes that have been empty, but when we've gone in there to inquire about self-storage, like, we're never going to rezone it into anything but retail. So what's happening, what we're seeing is a lot of those big boxes are being torn down, and then the property is being repositioned. So either senior care, smaller, what we would more call like island destinations. So like a smaller box with four individual tenants rather than one big large tenant to attract people into. And so we're seeing them being repurposed into like a grocery store. That might be the biggest box, which historically may have been not the anchor, but a solid tenant. Now it's becoming the anchor behind the front elevation. So it's changing the design of the big areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. That's awesome.
Now, when you had switched from doing the distressed properties, the distressed multifamily, into storage units, what was the catalyst there? Was there just more money in storage units? Was there a lack of supply in the distressed properties, or what prompted that complete adjustment and switch? Was it, what was it?
Well, it was twofold. One, we were having trouble identifying, good distress, not overpriced. We had clients that, I hear people buying, quote unquote distressed multifamily in California at a 6 cap. And I'm like, oh, holy cow, or a 5 cap. And it's like, that's not distressed. It's like,
not at all.
Awesome, right? So to me, it's like, where are you going to take this to, a 3 cap or a 4 cap? It's just the margins are too tight there. So there was that. And then we had a client that said, hey, I want you to find this. And we couldn't find it. Distress was like, okay, maybe, physical occupancy was at 90%, but economic occupancy was at 80%. Really, you're calling 80% occupancy, economic occupancy, 80% is distressed. So, and then how much margin could you really improve it in order to make it worthwhile in terms of the cap rate? And so that's where I said, hey, if you're going to get into this, you got to really look at the development. And we had a commercial property that had been rezoned for townhomes and condominiums. But because of the recession and the housing crash, no bank was providing lending on it. And the property was an old lock factory and, assembly a lock, and they was sitting vacant. And so nothing was happening with it. And we had to actually rezone it back from, it was originally industrial. It was zoned townhomes and condominiums, and we had to rezone it back to industrial in order to do self-storage there. And so we, our first tenant, our first client, we couldn't get the zoning for it. The mayor wouldn't sign off on it. And then we said to our client, hey, this might be a good self-storage opportunity. He brought his advisors in, and they assessed it, and they saw that the market supply and demand was good in that specific location. And the building configuration lent itself to us. And they said, well, it's a perfect building, but we don't have anybody to do it for us. And we said, well, we can do it. And so that's how we got into it. Nice. But to answer your question, Larry, we're specifically looking at a 3 to 5 mile radius. So if you say like Chicago, there's probably too much self-storage in Chicago. But if you look at a specific neighborhood, that's what we're going after, is that specific market.
Oh, so your market targeting is very, very narrow. So that's, wow. Okay.
Yeah, we looked at one building in Milwaukee. In fact, I don't know if you know Menards. So, Mike, you might know Menards being in Minnesota, but Larry might have no idea what Menards is in New York.
Yeah, I used to drive trucks, so I know Menards very well.
Okay, unless you're a NASCAR driver or a fan, right? Then you know Menards. Yeah. So they're a big hardware store, for those who don't know it on your podcast, and it's like a Home Depot or Lowe's. And they had this huge box. It was like 110,000 square feet on 17 acres. We could have done out parcels. We could have done a lot of different things. it was totally set up for. It was new roof, conditioned, fire sprinkler. All we literally have to do is come in and put in lockers. And it would have been, from a construction point of view, a home run. But I looked around and there's like 5 other facilities, self-storage facilities that I could see. And then the other things I could see was a bunch of single family homes. And I said, great site, great building. I don't think this location is going to work. And we went and looked at another building that was an 8-story building, just west of downtown Milwaukee. And, it was an old concrete building. It was the first fireproof building in Milwaukee, and 500,000 people within 3 miles, and there's no other self-storage near there. Oh, wow. This is both in Milwaukee. So the one had a saturation level of 9, where the national average is 7 square feet of lockers per capita, and the other one had one of 2.5. Wow. So obviously we went with the one that's 2.5 as opposed to above saturation. For above saturation, that's going to take us longer to lease up. It's going to be not going to get the pricing, but the one below it, we should be able to lease it up, no problem.
Nice. That's awesome. All right. So we have diverted just a little bit into that, but let's get back to the four methods of passive income. So can we talk about, can you overview that, and then let's dive into each one of those?
Yeah. We're looking at it as being, either you're actively doing it and you're creating a portfolio, or you're participating as a general partner, limited partner, or, and then there's obviously the different ranges of which asset types you're going after. So, we also look at it in terms of within the capital stack, what entities you're using to bring the capital to create that passive income, and also the tax preservations that you can do. So these are all the different elements that we consider and we look at and then evaluate what is the best situation in portfolio for us. So, we're analyzing, involvement, use, where the capital sources are coming in, how we can do tax preservation. Those are the elements that we consider.
Awesome.
Nice. Now, and I don't want to jump back to the self-storage because I wanted to kind of move on, but I got to be honest with you. I'd like to change the focus of this to self-storage because I wasn't aware, that's where your focus was. And I'm just so interested in the self-storage. Is there an opportunity for passive investing with a self-storage company? Now, do you do like syndications for self-storage? Do you bring in outside investors on and give them decent returns in that market and asset class?
There are definitely, more major syndications out there for sure. And in essence, that's our competition per se, right?
Right.
We do have investors in each and every one of our deals. And, that investor base has grown. Honestly, my first, and syndication is a broad term these days. So, when I first started, it was called having an equity investors. And then somewhere recently it's become syndication. So I'm not really sure what point in time it's changed. But back in 1998, when we did our first house, we tore down a single family house, built a new one and sold it. We had 3 investors that technically is a syndication. It was my uncle, my grandfather, and my dad. The financing terms back then were phenomenal. We raised $100,000 and we bought a house for $300,000. We tore it down, built a new one for $350,000. We sold it for $1,050,000. And they said, do it again and don't tell anyone. And that's when I knew I needed more investors. So since that period of time, we have grown our investor base. Obviously, my grandfather has passed away, and and this is indicative of all investors. There's a cycle and life stage in terms of where you go and how much risk you're willing to take. So my uncle and my father are more in retirement age, and they're more not in growth, but they're in preservation and spending. So they need more liquidity because they're now living off of those investments as opposed to trying to grow them. And so that's an important factor in terms of defining what everyone is trying to do. And certainly within self-storage, there are different asset classes and different things that you can accomplish within that. But we do have investors in each of our portfolios on an equity component. And that's where I was getting into in terms of the 4 stages that we look at is, so in our arrangements, they are more passive investors, but we also have we created opportunity zones funds for those investors who want to shelter their capital gains. We have some that are doing it through their IRAs, and then we have people that are strictly doing it with cash. And in each one of those situations, they all have different tax goals and objectives that they're trying to accomplish. And we were one of the first ones, if not the first ones, to do an opportunity zone fund as well as privately funded PACE financing for, if not in the country, I know for certain Ohio, that had both privately funded PACE as well as an opportunity zone fund. And the reason why we did it, we found out that the building wasn't an opportunity zone, and we said to our investors, hey, we're learning about this new tool that was created in the recent tax laws. If anyone is interested, let us know and we will pursue this. And if it doesn't apply to anybody, or if nobody wants it, then we won't pursue it. And we had 3 people immediately raise their hand, said, yeah, I totally want to do that. And so I was literally on the phone with the IRS, because keep in mind, I don't know if you guys know this, I had no idea, but when the government, when Congress and the Senate pass a bill and the president puts it into law, it might be like 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. So the whole opportunity zone legislation was literally like 3/4 of a page. Yeah. Now it becomes like, how does this get implemented? How does this get interpreted? How does this get really administered? Well, once that law is passed, then it goes to the IRS, and the IRS comes up with their recommendations, and then they go back to Congress and say, is this what you intended? And they go, well, yeah, pretty much, but come back with some more findings. And then they come back with more findings, like, yeah, now you got it. So when this was passed was in December of, January of 17, right when Trump got elected. Yep. Was it 8? I'm losing my dates now.
16.
See, he was elected in 16, but got inaugurated in 17. So it's January of 17 that it got passed into law. So then between January and November, the IRS was trying to figure out how to implement this. And we were closing, we were funding this or starting this in October of 18. And so I was literally calling the IRS and saying, I'm reading this, but the forms that it's referencing, I can't even find. They're like, well, they haven't been created yet. So they're like, you need to set it up like this. This is where we think it's going to be heading. And so if you follow these guidelines, you should be safe. This is what we're going to be proposing. And so we set it up along those lines, and we created the first fund. And granted, it was $250,000. We had 3 people, 100, 150 that put it into it. But now their tax structure, they got a 30% bump in their rate of return because now they're not paying capital gains on taxes. Or they're not paying taxes on capital gains. So they get that 30% bump right there. So that was a tool that we looked to enhance our investors' rate of return without changing the structure of the deal. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We looked for ways to enhance the rate of return, which independent of the performance. So a lot of these opportunity funds are going in and investing in properties because they have to. We're doing them because they're already good deals, and we're trying to make them better deals. And so that's one of the things that we're doing within, when we're saying the 4 strategies of passive investment, that's one of our strategies, because if we can enhance a rate of return without changing the structure of the deal, then inherently we're doing better. And that's the same with if we give back historic state tax credits, or if we do PACE financing, or any of these other instruments, or the other one is cost segregation. If we can do any of these, implement any of these techniques to enhance our investors' rate of return, we're going to do that.
I gotta imagine it just makes you more competitive too in that offering standpoint. If you can see those angles that nobody else is seeing, then that can obviously gives you the ability to pay more and make sure your offers a little bit more competitive when you're looking at buying these. Am I right?
Well, absolutely. We have people that come to us specifically because, the biggest competition for the 1031 is the OZ funds. Because people within a 1031, you're extremely limited. You have to have like a like entity, a like structure, and you have a specific time frame, which is a very tight time frame. We had investors saying, hey, look, I don't want to be confined by that. I want to find something better. And when you do a 1031, you have like 45 days to identify and then another 2 months to close. Within an opportunity zone, if you have capital gains, do you truly know what your capital gains liability is the moment you sell the property? You don't, because you don't know the rest of your tax situation, right? And you don't know that until December 31st when you turn over all the information to your tax accountant, and then you have until April to really figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So the IRS identified this and they said, okay, fine, we're going to give you the entire year plus another months to get through to prepare your tax return before you have to identify this fund. So inherently, you're getting a longer runway to identify a good property than a 1031. And it doesn't have to be real estate. It could be stocks. It could be, you sold some artwork, whatever it is, whatever capital gains. And so there's just a tremendous lot more flexibility within the opportunity zone compared to a 1031.
That's awesome. So for the self-storage, how do you see that faring in, obviously we're talking about being on the front end of a recession and, who knows what the next 18 to 24 months could bring. How do you see that faring if things go south for the economy and real estate in general?
And I kind of want to add a second part to that question. How do you see it faring if there's a mass exodus out of big cities into the more rural areas? Will you just change your targeting of where you're going with the self-storage, or do you think that there won't be a mass exodus out of cities?
Well, there's been twofold what's been happening. I think right now the millennials are a unique generation in the sense that they were not as anxious to buy. They were willing to rent, which was lending them to be more into the cities and not going after, quote unquote, the materialistic big home in the suburbs and this and that and those sorts of things. And so what was happening is, I'll speak specifically about Chicago because I know this market better than I know other markets. So the big homes in the more affluent communities were suffering and decreasing in pricing because people were not leaving the city. And so people were trying to move out, but they couldn't because no one was buying their homes. And so that, in fact, when people did buy it, other people in the community would rent them so their kids could stay in the schools. And then as soon as their kids are graduated, then they can move freely out of the area. With the virus hitting, those people that were willing to stay in the city are now going to the suburbs. But ultimately, from a population perspective, I don't think you're going to be able to totally disperse the city population into the suburbs just from a zoning and housing stock perspective. We're always going to have that balance because otherwise there's going to have to be a dramatic change in the overall housing stock. Now, when we're looking at what new products are coming online, there might be more receptivity to building multifamily out in the suburbs, but a similar equation was when they had all the low-income housing. They used to be in high-rises and mid-rises. And they tore them all down. They dispersed that entire population set into basically, they converted single families into three flats. But the population massing is still in the city. And I don't think it's going to disperse that much further out. But to answer your question, I don't think we're going to have a radical change. But one of the ways in which we are changing is rather than just looking at development opportunities, we are looking at other, what we would call Class B or C facilities, which are, don't have as much expectation for appreciation, but we're looking at it from a cash flow perspective. So we are changing our strategy and being open to other types of self-storage as opposed to just Class A redevelopment.
Awesome. And what are some of for the people who are more familiar with your traditional multifamily, your traditional, small to medium-sized apartment buildings, as a lot of our audience is, what are the biggest differences between, if you're looking at that and like your self-storage? I'm sure there's a lot of similarities, but what are some of the key differences?
Well, the difference is my first multifamily project, it was a 400 unit development, which, the revenues on it was over $100 million. Okay. So it was ground up, and we did underground parking, clubhouse, tennis courts, condominiums, ponds, swimming pools, all those sorts of things, but $100 million. So let's just take a typical apartment building that I sold. I had 18 units. I sold it for $1 million. So basically I'm looking at 18 units, $1 million. So if you put the price per door, you can come up with that. My operating expenses were about 55%. So when I look at self-storage, I can get 600 to 1,000 rental units at a cost basis between $6 and $8 million. The value would be between $10 and $14 million. So from a cost perspective, I don't have to invest nearly as much to get exponentially a lot more rentable units.
Yep.
Okay. So that's the first thing. My operational costs are cut from 55 down to 35. The biggest expense within self-storage is real estate taxes. The next is, labor to operate the facility. The rest of it is
35% operating expense, you're saying?
Ratio, right.
Nice.
So, I classify it as apartments without toilets. I don't have to worry about getting calls in the middle of the night.
Nobody likes changing those toilets.
Yeah, you had a really fun evening, and then it didn't end so fun when you put something down the toilet. And the next thing you know, it's leaking into the people below you and ruining their night. I don't have those calls. So the big thing is it's easier to operate, it's more predictable to operate, and it costs me less to operate. My exposure is less, but then I also have greater flexibility. Because, for instance, we had one facility where we couldn't rent the 10 by 10s, but our 10 by 20s were sold out. Wow. Because it was more affluent community, and when they were renting the units, they were like remodeling a home, and so they'd come in and rent like 5 units for 8 months, but they would take all the biggest units. So what do? We took out a corrugated metal wall between the two 10 by 10s and made it a 10 by 20, and then they all leased up.
Nice. Awesome.
So if I need to change a 10 by 10. I can change it into 2 5x5s. I can, or I can take 2 10 by 10s and make them a 10 by 20. I have a lot more, and it's easier for me to change that than it is an apartment. It's hard for me to change an apartment configuration.
Nice. Yeah, a lot easier than changing a 2-1 to a 3-1, or splitting it, to multiple properties or multiple units. So that's awesome.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you coming down to share this knowledge. We kind of changed it on the fly because of the self-storage and my interest in that. So thank you for adjusting with us on that. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about where they can get a hold of you and connect?
Well, one, we really appreciate being on this podcast with you and your group. So what we do is we'd like to offer 2 different things. One, you can find out information about us at Coda, CODAMG.com. That's Coda, MG as in managementgroup.com. If you go on there, you can download a free feasibility study. So a feasibility study shows you how we evaluate the market for self-storage within a 3 to 5 mile radius. But it also gives you like an overview of the overall self-storage industry. It's like 100 pages, and it not only talks specifically about a property, but it also talks about the industry. The other thing we'd like to offer your listeners is if they would like to learn more specifically, or if they have a potential property that they want to evaluate or go through it. If they want to learn more about it, if they email us at info@codamg.com, info@codamg.com, they want to learn more specifically about it, we can set up a phone call with me. Or if they want to underwrite a deal or see how we underwrite a deal, then we're going to have a call with our director of sales and acquisitions, Martin. And, if you put in the email your podcast name and then tell us like what you're looking to do, either evaluate or understand how we can do it, we will offer that to your listeners because we want to give back. And, we just did this recently with someone who came to us 2 years ago, and he finally found a building and we evaluated it. And I will say it was like the absolute worst building we've ever seen in our lives. And we're like, run from this building. Don't spend any more time on it. But, he was appreciative because of the fact that he would have gone forward with this property. And Martin's really good at it. I mean, when he first joined us, he was learning about self-storage, and now he tells me all he dreams about is self-storage. So he might need some help on some other things. But, you grow up dreaming about metal boxes.
Yeah.
But,
needs to talk to somebody.
He does need to talk to somebody. But, we will offer that to your listeners. And we want to make sure that it ties back to you guys as well so that we can give you that feedback.
All right, appreciate it.
That's awesome. So that's info@codamg.com. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Awesome. Yeah. And if anybody's interested in this, I mean, having somebody with your experience offer up that type of feedback, and especially like deal specific feedback, if anybody's interested in that, obviously that's huge. Your example right there of how you potentially saved that gentleman from investing in an absolutely terrible deal. I mean, that's invaluable, right? So definitely take advantage of that if anybody's interested in this space. So
I'll
Awesome,
give you one
Scott.
hint. When you see plants growing on the roof, that's not a good sign. So
No, that's not aesthetically pleasing. That's not intentional.
well, there are sometimes it was, but this one is clearly not. So
That's awesome. All right. Well, Scott, again, we really appreciate you jumping on here and sharing what you know with the listeners. And folks, if you're interested, again, that's info@codamg.com. We'll throw the links in the show notes as well so people can get access to that. Other than that, we really appreciate you jumping on, man.
Yeah.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great one.
All right, Mr. Frio, that was Scott Krone talking about self-storage, man. What do you think about that?
I've always been kind of interested in self-storage because, I'm not really a hoarder, but I enjoy finding that good deal and negotiating it. And, I've been a big fan of watching storage units go up for auction, and I've attended some of the auctions just for fun. But the concept of the storage facility just has always interested me since I got into real estate. And I was very happy that Scott came and talked to us about it. And it sounds like the returns on your investment can be, if done correctly, can be done huge.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. I've always been a little bit intrigued about this area of real estate because it comes off as more passive, right? Like I get you can make any type of real estate passive with the right systems, but let's be honest, no tenants living there, it's going to be more passive than, a multifamily or, a single family, property that you're renting out. You don't want to be living there, right? It's a little bit more of a business, a little bit more passive. So, I've been intrigued in this area for a long time, kind of for that reason. So I was excited to learn a little bit from Scott about it.
This might be a good opportunity for passive income for those people that are using the whole changing a toilet at 2 a.m. as their only reason not to invest in real estate. So try this. You won't be changing any toilets anytime soon.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So. And it's an interesting because the self-storage, especially in the last 6 to 8 months, has really, really taken off as well. I don't know what it is about the pandemic that makes people, want to buy more storage, but it's been blowing up.
Yes, it has. So, the call to action, man. What do you want to do for a call to action?
Well, per usual, we're going to entice the listeners to dive a little deeper if they want to know more. So CodaMG.com and info@CodaMG.com was the resources for you that Mr. Krone gave you. So head on over there. He's got a couple free resources. One of them, I guess it's a couple of them. One of them is self-storage feasibility report. So get in there. It's a 100 plus page feasibility report that you can get for free. The other one that I thought was really cool, man, was email info@CodaMG.com and then mention the Real Estate Marathon podcast, and they'll help you underwrite and analyze a deal. So side by side, look at the deal with you and let you know, with their experience, if this is a good deal in their eyes. So I thought that was really cool, with somebody who has been in it for as long as they have, with as much experience as they have. If you're interested in this and you find a deal, why wouldn't you take advantage of one of the experts in the area going side by side and looking at the numbers with you?
Yeah, and he had that example of the gentleman that brought him a deal, and he told him that it was probably the worst building he'd ever seen for self-storage, and was able to save him from making a huge mistake, and that's also one of the benefits. So.
Yeah, our mentors have told us this many, many times over that you don't want to force a good deal, and it's better to pass on. I don't know. I can't remember what they're saying.
No deal is better than a bad deal.
Yes, thank you. I was reaching for it, man. I started it and I didn't have it, and I thought it would come by the time I got there, and it didn't. But man, that's why you're here.
I got your back, bro.
But yeah, no deal is better than a bad deal, because that it can put you on the sideline for a very long time. It can take you out of the game, and it's just great to have a sounding board, somebody who's actually done this before, to maybe help you from putting your hand on that stove and getting burned with a bad deal.
That's it. Well, that's everything I've got for the folks tonight. Mike, how about you?
That's it for me, man. So thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the Real Estate Marathon podcast. I'll see you next time.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Real Estate Marathon podcast. If you found value in any of the content from this show, consider supporting us in the following ways. Subscribe to the Real Estate Marathon podcast. Leave a rating and review. Continue the conversation with like-minded individuals on social media by heading over to the Real Estate Marathon podcast Facebook group, or follow us on Instagram and Twitter @Real Estate Marathon Podcast.